Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bible in 1 year with the Preacher's Husband. Today we're talking about Exodus chapters 4, 5, and 6. And in chapter 4, we start out with God talking to Moses. And basically Moses questioning God, saying, you sure that I need to go do this? What if I go in front of Pharaoh to say, hey, set my people free? And he says, no, he don't believe me that God says this. And God says, well, here's what I'm going to do. I am going to perform some miracles for you. Here's what you're going to do. Throw your staff down on the ground. So Moses throws his staff down on the ground. Staff turns into a snake. Ah! So Moses runs away from it. But God's like, no. Grab the tail of it. So Moses leans down there, grabs the tail of it, and turns it back into a staff. He's like, wow. And then there were two other miracles that he showed. One, he said, stick your hand inside your cloak. So he does, and he pulls it out. It had like leprosy on it. It was like nasty. It was white. It was just sickly looking. He said, now put it back. So he puts it back in his cloak, and he'll pull it out again. Boom, it's normal again. And then there was a third one that he did. He basically said, if that doesn't work, take some water from the Nile and pour it down on the ground, and when you do, it's going to turn into blood. So that was his three things that the Lord gave Moses the ability to do and to perform these miracles on his behalf. So Moses is like, okay, surely that's going to work, but I'm not the best guy at talking. Isn't there like a better person to talk? Like maybe even my brother, and God's getting mad at him at this point. God's getting downright angry at him, saying, listen, I picked you, okay? I tell you what, isn't Aaron coming to you? How about you and Aaron together go, and you could tell Aaron what to say, and I will teach both of you, and I'll help you both through this, if that'll encourage you more. And Moses is like, well, okay, I guess so. So Moses travels back to Egypt. He goes and he talks to his father-in-law Jethro and says, I need to return to Egypt. Jethro says, sure, go ahead. Because by this time, everybody that wanted Moses dead had already died. So Moses is pretty much free to go back to Egypt and be okay with it. So partway through this chapter, down in verse 24, you get this random thing that's stuck in here. And it says, Chapter 4, verse 24. On the trip at an overnight campsite, it happened that the Lord confronted him and intended to put him to death. So Zipporah took a flint, cut off her son's foreskin, threw it at Moses' feet, and said, you are a bridegroom of blood to me. So he let him alone. At that time, she said, you are a bridegroom of blood, referring to the circumcision. So what happened is, children were supposed to be circumcised at 8 days. Well, Moses kind of neglected his duties there, so his wife went ahead and took care of it for him. So basically what she is saying, that she just saved his life because Moses hadn't done the circumcision yet. So that stuck out to me as kind of odd, being in there with this whole story of setting the people free. But there was purpose in that. There was purpose. His focus wasn't quite where it needed to be. And then Aaron comes back. So here we have Moses and Aaron, and they talk to each other, and they told them all about these signs, and he said, okay, let's go. So Moses says, let's go confront Pharaoh. Chapter 5, he confronts Pharaoh, and he performs these miracles. Pharaoh basically says, actually, he goes and he just confronts Pharaoh and says, here's what you need to do. God has told me this. You need to set the people free. And Pharaoh's like, no, not going to happen. Sorry, dude. I am going to instead take away all their straw for making bricks and make them make just the same number of bricks. Make them go get their own straw. And so basically what Pharaoh was doing was making it harder and harder and harder for the people of Israel. It kind of backfired on him. Pharaoh basically said no. So we get to chapter 6, and God promises freedom again, because Moses is kind of beat down at this point, and he's just like, I can't believe this. He didn't know. God, why did you call me? And there are better people than this to go. And he kind of reminds me a little bit of George Washington. Again, when we talked about George Washington again. But George Washington, he is Some people actually refer to him as the American Moses, and the reason why is because he was not the greatest. He was not the best. He was not the smartest. He was not the most intelligent. He was not the most cunning. But he was surrounded by the people that were. And this is basically where Moses is heading. Even though he wasn't the best orator, he had Aaron with him, who was one of the best orators around. And you're going to see this pattern with Moses' life about the people around him and the people that God helps him with. And that's what happened with George Washington. He led our country through 3 of the major crossroads to establish our nation. He led us to victory in the Revolutionary War, and then he superintended the Constitutional Convention, and then he was unanimously elected as our first president. Now, you got to think, how can so much greatness be embodied in one man? But it really wasn't that he was that great, because you got to think about how many people were surrounding him. Think about Franklin and Jefferson and Patrick Henry and Mason and John and Samuel Adams and Hamilton and Madison. Almost all of these people were far better educated than George Washington ever was. Yet George Washington was always the one that was in the lead and was in the forefront. Why do you think that is? A lot of that had to do with his charisma and his stature. So 2 big things. He was very charismatic, and one, he had a large stature. People talk all the time about how he was 6'2", when the average man of that age was only 5'7". So he was a big guy. He was over 200 pounds, so he was solid in stature. People looked up to him physically, and as a leader, he kind of held the audience when he spoke as well. But he wasn't the best orator, but he had people around him that were. Now, the biggest thing though that kept him in the lead consistently was his character, his true character. Now, Abigail Adams, who was the wife of John Adams, she had this to say about George Washington. She says, he was possessed of power, possessed of an extensive influence, but he never used it but for the benefit of his country. If you look through the whole tenor of his life, history will not produce to us a parallel. That right there speaks volumes about his integrity. And even Thomas Jefferson talked about his integrity when he wrote about George Washington. He said his integrity was most pure, his justice the most inflexible I have ever known. No motives or friendship or hatred being able to would bias his decisions. He was indeed, in every sense of the word, a wise, a good, and great man. It may truly be said that never did nature and fortune combine more perfectly to make a man great and to place him in the same constellation with whatever worthies have merited from man an everlasting remembrance. So basically, he is speaking of his integrity and how honest he was. You knew what you were going to get with George Washington because you knew that he was going to follow what he felt was right, and he was going to follow God. I know that he was a godly man. I've done a lot of history on George Washington. I know he was a godly man, and he followed God just like Moses did. And Moses was very much a biblical George Washington to me. And George Washington was a more modern day American Moses, in my opinion. But that's my opinion. Tomorrow, we're going to spread on out and we're going to go to Exodus chapter 7, 8, and 9. So I hope to see you tomorrow for another episode of the Bible in 1 Year with the Preacher's Husband. Good night.